Okay, so quickly, a few ground rules. If you have any questions, as usual, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I also will pause briefly throughout the presentation if anyone has any questions. If you can, turn your camera on. Thank you, folks. I see cameras are coming on. It's always nice to see faces and not just the void of the internet. And please, if possible, just mute your mic unless it's discussion time. Again, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. So today's session, for context, I generally do this in like 2 hours and there's more of an interactive component, but just given the condensed time, really what I'm going to go over more so is just what conflict is, the anatomy that makes up to it, conflict management. No, we will skip the self-assessment. That'll happen on your own. And then we'll get into the conflict resolution roadmap, intelligence, emotional intelligence. And then finally, I'll have some self-assessments and activities for you folks at the end to do either individually among yourselves, or if you are with a group right now, you can do it within your group. So why is any of this sort of important? Why is it relevant? Well, for yourselves as founders, as entrepreneurs, really at the end of the day, it's about people. In life, and especially as entrepreneurs, you have to interact with people with different beliefs, approaches, and thinkings from you. And they're not always going to be on the same wavelength. There's going to be a difference of opinions. Again, not a bad thing, but you should be able to know, how do you manage that? And more importantly, how do you manage how you react to that? So some expectations for here there's going to be 4 sort of expectations out of this: is understanding the different styles of conflict management. I'll talk about some tools and techniques on how to resolve conflict, understand what is emotional intelligence, its components, and how to apply it. And at the end, hopefully you've got a better insight and some tools that can help you both in your MEIE courses, your group work, in your life as a founder, hopefully overall in general. So first, let's get into conflict. What is conflict? So a pretty textbook standard definition: a clash between individuals arising out of a difference in thought processes, attitudes, understandings, interests, requirements, and sometimes even perceptions. That's a really nice way of saying you're just not agreeing. So, but let's break that down. Definition aside, what is the anatomy of conflict? What makes up that? So in order to figure out how we can resolve conflict, we first need to have a real good understanding of the anatomy of conflict itself and how things get to where they do. So conflict arises from 3 circumstances that come together at the same time. First, the belief that you're being deprived of something you need or want. Second, the belief that someone else is causing the deprivation. And third, the belief that the deprivation violates a value, a social norm, or a rule. For example, let's say a student named Mark forgets his team leader, Lily, in an email loop about a project, a team project that they're doing. Lily gets upset about being bypassed. She accuses Mark of violating the social rule of running things past his leader. Lily identifies Mark as the source of her irritation, and then she blames him for the wrongdoing and claims he's violated a team norm. So if you're currently dealing with conflict, see if you can deconstruct it by looking at these 3 circumstances. Are you being deprived of something? Are you depriving someone else of something else? And if yes, what value, social norm, or rule are you or the other person breaking? So try and really think about how you respond to conflict. The way we all respond to conflict has its roots in our upbringings and our culture. And here we've got a pretty diverse crowd. So some of us might be ready to argue ourselves into exhaustion. And if you personally aren't, I'm sure there are many of us who know someone who is like this, although I'm sure no one on here would argue themselves into exhaustion. And some would rather take cover and wait out the storm. So in order to figure out how we can approach conflict, we need to first understand our own default conflict response styles, so we can practice making better choices when we respond to conflict in the future. So on the side here, you can see Thomas Kilmann conflict model. This illustrates how people typically behave when faced with an uncomfortable situation. As we go through each style, be on the lookout for what your default is. So let's say you think you should get assigned a higher position in your startup or your project. You want to take on bigger projects, more responsibilities. You've been a member of this team for a while, and have been contributing a lot. You've been going above and beyond what was agreed upon. But just thinking about the conversation or approach the co-founders and bring this up, it's producing some sort of internal conflict within yourself. This can be because of a fear of rejection or being passed over. In the avoid quadrant of the model, simply put, you don't ask. So that's right here on the bottom left. You let the opportunity pass because the fear of rejection is so high, you can't bring yourself to ask. So you lose. And in truth, your team loses out too, because your value is going unrecognized. However, we move over to the accommodate quadrant. You find the will to ask, but when you're met with questions or pushback, you fold. You say something like, oh, that's okay. I thought I just asked, but no big deal. In this scenario, you lose and they win. However, we move up to the top left quadrant in the compete quadrant. Sometimes this is also called the force quadrant. You definitely ask. And if your team member seems to be reluctant or says no, you basically push harder. You defend your request, and you might just add a little threat to get your team leader to see things your way. This is the I win, you lose scenario. However, in the collaborate quadrant here, which is I win, you win, you make your requests, present your case, and you focus on brainstorming to find a path forward that works for both parties. This is generally the classic win-win. Now, it looks like the goal of the model is compromise. Seems like a good idea. You ask for what you want, and over the course of the conversation, you give up a point or two, and the other person also gives up a point or two. So you win and lose, and so does the other person. It could be argued, though, that this model should be altered so that collaborate is the center of any conversation, where the goal is to find agreement. You enter the conversation with the mindset that you're going to be valued, and you want to explore possibilities and options until you're both happy with the outcome. It's fairly likely that you might find some wiggle room on minor details, such as the timing on something or the title of something, but the overall outcome, the feeling of the conversation is that you've done your best and your needs and requests have been well met. You've preserved your relationship with the other person and maybe even deepened it. Either way, the collaborating compromise squares are generally where you want to try to aim your dealings with conflict. So be honest with yourself and pinpoint your default conflict style. With this awareness, you can have the opportunity to choose collaboration as a more effective way to solve your everyday problems. It's important to note, though, however, that all of these conflict style managements may be appropriate to use depending on the conflict that you're in. And we'll explore that in the next few slides. So let's start with the compete style of conflict management, sometimes also referred to as the force style. What do you think this is appropriate? If anyone have any ideas when this is appropriate, feel free to throw it in the chat, unmute yourselves. Any idea when this style is appropriate? One side weightage. Okay. Bueller, anyone? No? Okay. Let's jump into it. So here are some potential situations where this might be appropriate. When a quick, decisive action is vital, such as an emergency situation. When there is no any solution. Okay. Another one is on important issues where the actions are unpopular and need to be implemented. On issues that are vital to a team's success, when upper management, let's say, for example, the university administration, requires you to make certain decisions. And it can be even used against people who take advantage of the non-competitive behaviors of others. So folks are like, oh, they're all pushovers. I'm going to take advantage of this. However, this style isn't generally recommended for most situations. More times than not, it's not going to resolve the conflict in a constructive manner, and actually can lead to more destructive conflict occurring or preventing differing opinions from being voiced at all, which, if you're part of a team, that really does stifle one of the benefits. All right. So the next one is the avoid style of conflict management. This is the I lose, you lose. When do you think this approach is appropriate?
when the particular subject is not a very high priority, or it is not affecting the objectives of the whole team,
Mhm.
that an instant decision has to be made. In that case, maybe little avoidance could be considered.
Absolutely. Any more thoughts? Okay. Shall I do? So yeah, some of them are when the issue is trivial or more important issues are pressing. If the potential disruption caused by the conflict outweighs the benefit of a resolution, when people need to calm down and perhaps regain perspective, and when others are better suited to resolving the conflict more effectively. However, it should also be noted, as mentioned before, avoiding conflicts will allow issues to fester and grow. This style isn't generally recommended because, if you don't rip off the band-aid, so to speak, it's something that you will have to address later, and it could be a lot worse. So the next is accommodate. This one is I lose, you win. Anyone have any ideas when this is appropriate?
I guess if you have extremely limited options in what you have to do, like you're kind of limited by two options and somebody's pressing for one side, there's going
Yeah,
to be a win-lose situation there.
cool. So here's some. So you may actually be wrong and need to allow a better position to be heard. It might be an issue that is more important to others than it is to yourself. So, there's no point fighting. You might as well just accommodate them. You might want to strengthen your relationship by building social credit through accommodation. So say you can do favors or, get some folks to help you or owe you a favor or something later down the line. Harmony and stability might also be especially important in your team dynamic. So it might be important to use this style for trivial things. Again, things that don't matter. This approach can also be used for learning opportunities. And that's because you're allowing others to develop themselves by learning from their mistakes. It should be noted that accommodation is only constructive when one party voluntarily gives up their position. This is very important to consider and be aware of, because if one person does not voluntarily give up their position, then you are actually within the realm of compete or forced approach, which is not a constructive approach to conflict resolution. Next one is collaborate. I win, you win. Anyone have an idea when this is used? I assume most folks are probably using this for their style of conflict resolution.
I mean, anything that is beneficial for the team as a whole.
Right. Yeah, so finding a solution where the concerns of both parties are too important to be compromised. Perhaps you want to merge insights from people with different perspectives to gain commitment by incorporating concerns and reaching a consensus. So collaboration is a constructive win-win approach to resolving conflict. It's usually the best approach and outcome, as collaboration enhances communication, learning, and builds trust. The next one is compromise. I win some, you win some. Anyone have an idea where this could be used? Oh, Aman, I saw you unmuted. Don't be shy.
No. I just hit my mic again. Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah. So I think when there are some factors which are to be, laid off for a particular teammate, but then there are some other, pluses of there to be considered, on a perspective, and also the team in general might have to accommodate according to that particular person over the the whole thing. I think in those cases, could this would be an important step after collaboration. I think compromise is the next best one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's some examples when it's appropriate, when your goals are important but not worth the disruption of a more assertive approach, when both parties have equal power and are committed to mutually exclusive goals, perhaps to arrive at a temporary settlement on a complex issue, to quickly arrive at a solution when under a time crunch, but it's not a crisis or emergency. Usually that probably happens when assignments are due or projects or exams, and when the collaborative approach does not work. And when you're using the compromise style, make sure that you have the buy-in of all parties involved. Without the buy-in, the agreement of everyone, compromising is generally a lose-lose outcome. It's because both sides basically have to give something up. And if the other party's not brought into the solution, they might have hostility later where it's like, well, they made this choice without me. There may be some resentment, and that potentially could evolve and create more conflict later down the line. So next, I'm going to talk about the conflict resolution roadmap. Actually, before I do, are there any questions about the different anatomy of a conflict? Hopefully this part here, while everyone's listening, is you're reflecting going, oh yeah, I've encountered some of this in some area. Like this is more just putting some names and a framework to it, which I think is most of this session. But a lot of this stuff you can probably reflect back, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in your group in the academic setting, where you've encountered these sort of conflicts. Okay. So the conflict resolution roadmap is really 5 different parts, and we'll dive deeper into each of them. They are identifying the issues and needs, distinguishing fact from fiction, beginning the conflict conversation, getting alignment and brainstorming, and getting to an agreement. So this roadmap isn't perfect, first of all. This is, as most roadmaps, as most blueprints, a good starting point of how you can potentially resolve conflicts. But in theory versus reality, there's always going to be differences. So do keep that in mind when we're talking about this. So the first step, identifying the issue. If we're in a blaming state of mind, acknowledging the conflict and being willing to talk about it may be difficult. But pointing fingers at people and the blame game, that's not going to solve the problem. So the first step is to work on yourself. First, you find the nature or subject of the disagreement. Think of a current or recent situation and ask yourself whether this is relational, having to do with your relationship, substantive, having to do with disagreement about content or process, or is perceptual, a disagreement on how you're viewing the situation. And identify what your own actions and behaviors demonstrate about what you want for yourself, for others, for your relationship, or for your team. The first step in the resolution roadmap is not assigning any kind of blame to yourself or others, but more so it's simply to take note of what's driving your feelings, actions, and motives. This is very much looking within yourself. Essentially, if you can understand your motives, you have a better chance of changing them, because all of the motives, all of how you feel, that's all within your control. The next is distinguishing fact from fiction, and this is internally. So in a conflict, there are 2 things operating: what actually happened and how people interpret what happened, otherwise known as fact or fiction. Something may happen where your feelings get the best of you, and you tell a story to yourself about why it happened, reacting by saying something that might place the blame on others. This causes you to end up in a full-blown argument. What gets us into trouble when something happens that upsets us is not always the facts, but the story we may tell ourselves about such facts. For example, let's say you stayed up all night to put together a draft proposal for a sponsorship package for your student organization. You hand the draft package to your leader and review, and they return it full of red pen edits on every single section and page. The facts here are: 1, you pulled an all-nighter to do all this, and 2, your team leader returned it to you full of markups. Now, the fiction may be that you think your leader wants to critique everything you do and does not appreciate your work. Factually, however, it wasn't the red pen edits that made you angry. It was your interpretation of what that they meant that made you angry. To make things worse, when something like this happens, we might lose control and say things like, "This person got me so frustrated." That's a PG version of probably what most people would say in reality. But the truth is, nobody can make you feel what you feel. You make your own feelings and how you feel about it. So take that in for a second. This isn't to say your feelings should be felt, but very often our unexamined feelings lead us into unproductive behavior. So in the slide, there are a few questions on here to help you examine your stories and feelings. And you can use these questions as a template to prepare for any conflict resolution conversations. Question number 1 is, how are you behaving about the issue? Are you stewing on it or reacting with anger or sarcasm or blame? Question 2 is, what stories are you using to justify your behavior? Our stories usually begin with phrases like I never, or I always, or you never, or you always. So write down your story. Now, with question 3, what feelings do your stories generate? What feelings get you stimulated? Anger, rejection, betrayal, whatever it is, feel it and name it. And question 4, what might also be true? This question is all about finding new perspectives to view a conflict. Think about the subject of your conflict and the stories you're telling, and see if you can come up with alternative versions that create some wiggle room for empathy with your conflict partner. And question 5, how can you take your part in the conflict? Before you attempt to resolve a conflict, you need to take responsibility for the part you've played. Have you been disengaging because you disagreed with the strategy or process? Have you been triangulating to get people on your side? And for this one here, you really do need to be honest with yourself and really distinguish the fact from the fiction. By doing this, you can get the clarity you need to find your way back to cooperation and workability. And it's not easy, we love lying to ourselves for the most part. So you need to have that honest internal reflection for this portion of the conflict resolution roadmap. So now we're going to talk about the beginning of the conflict conversation. Opening a conflict resolution conversation can be the hardest part of this entire process. The good news is that all the investigation you've done on yourself, identifying the issues as you see them, locating where you can take your part in the conflict, and separating fact from fiction, that'll give you enough clarity to move from avoidance to conversation. Your job in the opening conversation is to express yourself in a way that makes it safe for your conversation partner to engage. And here are some key elements of a successful opening. State the facts as you see them. Tell your story. Ask your conflict partner for their perspective. Be persistent if your conflict partner seems dismissive, but also stay calm and professional. Don't lose your cool. Truth is, though, not everyone you attempt to resolve a conflict with will have the same skills you're learning right now. They won't play by the rules. And you might even feel like you're the adult and your conflict partner is the teenager throwing a tantrum. Anyone here been in that before? Maybe? No? But if you persist calmly and you don't let your conflict partner's reaction trigger you, you'll be able to state your facts, tell your story, and ask questions that make your conflict partner feel safe for their facts and stories to emerge. The next is gaining alignment and brainstorming. If you're currently facing a conflict, you very likely have an idea or several ideas that would solve the problem. But if you try to go from identifying the issues and straight in a solution, you run the risk of gaining false consensus, a fake yes for the purpose of getting out of the conversation as quickly as possible. So you have to step into the messy part and hear the other person out. Hear their facts and ideas and stories. So they're not just part of the problem, but also part of the process of getting to the solution. One thing that can help you through the messy part is by asking these questions. What are we committed to? What goal are we all trying to reach? And the purpose of these two questions is you're trying to find a common theme to anchor or focus your problem-solving process and keep you and everyone else on track. Answering these questions and finding alignment will bring shape and focus to your brainstorming, and it'll help you get to the solution and a shared purpose. The next is getting to agreement. So you might think that once the conflict conversation is through and you've gotten through some of the issues and challenges and starting to find the solutions, getting to the agreement is easy. But what I've noticed in my own disagreements is that sometimes I'm just glad to be done with the hard part, that I'm kind of spent emotionally and I skip over what my conflict partner and I are actually agreeing to. And that is a recipe for having the same conflict over and over again. So getting an agreement is the fifth step in the resolution roadmap. Be diligent on identifying next steps and nail down the what, the who, and by when to avoid a repeat of the conflict. On a side note too, I think getting to an agreement, this is something that's critical of all meetings. So what I've noticed, and I don't know if you folks have also, if you're ever in any kind of meeting, whether it's a team meeting or with other departments or other individuals, sometimes people don't really have the agreement portion of, okay, what are the next steps? What are those details? So just like in a meeting in conflict resolution, this part is absolutely critical also, because you need to ensure that everyone's on alignment and this doesn't pop up again. So in summary, we've talked about the different conflict styles: compete, collaborate, avoid, accommodate, and compromise, the conflict resolution roadmap. And finally, I put a communication there because I wanted to highlight this from my own experiences. So this is very subjective, but I find communication is a massive contributor, especially this day and age when we're doing things in Zoom, we're not in a room, but even when we are, a lot of times, 80% of the problems result from 20% of the issues. And generally that comes from miscommunication. Perhaps you're doing a team meeting and you're coming up with what your goals are, what you need to do for a project. Maybe you didn't write it down. Maybe the expectations weren't clear. Fast forward a few weeks later, everyone thought, oh, okay, yeah, we're all good. Let's get together now and put this project together. And parts are all wrong or alignment isn't there. Communication is absolutely critical. In this day and age, a big part of avoiding conflict, or a lot of it, can be just having clear communication. So I just really want to emphasize that part. Actually, before I get into emotional intelligence, any questions on what was discussed? Is anyone going through their own experiences going, oh yeah, I totally did. I've totally experienced all of this.
Yeah, I had a question actually.
Yeah, go for it.
So in situations where, let's say, you don't have time to go over through this conflicts, in a frame of a week or two meetings a week or so on and so forth, if it is only once when you are carrying all of this, and if you want to start with collaborative and then maybe go towards compromise, but if the person on the other side has already pre-made their mind, and how to pursue those kind of conversations. I mean, it's not only about team, just in general.
Yeah, a big part of that is empathy. So like, understand where are they coming from? Like if they've made up their mind, ask them, just like, where are you coming from? Explain to me sort of what your position on this is, what your logic is, and then go from there. Because, like any conversation, think of like customer discovery, you're going in with a bunch of unknowns and you need to ask questions to get more data, to get a better understanding of the other individual. And there are going to be some where like they're just not reasonable. Like they're all about like, it's my way or the highway. It doesn't matter. But the first step is to be like, okay, you feel very passionate about this side. Why? Like, what's the logic behind it? Where are you coming from? And see, is there any way to have some more compromise that way? It doesn't work for everyone, because there are some personalities where they are hot-headed, but it doesn't hurt to at least ask, to go, okay, let me try. I'm trying to understand where you're coming from and why you think strongly about this. Explain it to me, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, so on those notes, is it good to switch over to an avoidance or accommodate, or how compete? I mean, what is the next third best after compromise? I know there is no straight answer for that, but just to have a perspective on that. Let's say avoid for a while because they are very overwhelmed with the thought process, or just
Yeah, you could try avoid for a bit, and again, this is really subjective. I'm not saying you should just do it, but like sometimes it is cooler heads prevail. Like Time doesn't heal everything, as they say, but at least if they need some time to cool off, revisit the conversation. But the thing is, with avoid, it's like you're going to have to come to some sort of conclusion. And depending on it, it might just be, you know what, this ain't going to work. That happens too. But
Yeah.
you know, if you've gone through the conflict resolution roadmap, you've done a lot of thinking, you know where you're coming from. You've talked to the other partner, the other individual, and you know where they're coming from. It's like, if this isn't aligning right, just fundamentally, you know, c'est la vie, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. All right. So the next is emotional intelligence. So let's talk about emotional intelligence. In a nutshell, emotional intelligence refers to the ability to identify and manage one's own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. So an emotionally intelligent individual is both highly conscious of their own emotional state, and this includes negative ones, anger, frustration, sadness, and they're also able to identify and manage their own emotional and is able to identify and manage their emotional intelligence. And this is a crucial component of leadership. Your ability to manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence others, has been considered one of the strongest indicators of high workplace performance. Research actually shows that 90% of top performers in the workplace are high in emotional intelligence. And I had the reference in there somewhere. I'll throw it in later, so that way I'm not just making up that 90%. The good news here is that unlike personality and IQ, which are fairly fixed and don't tend to change much when you reach adulthood, everyone has the ability to develop and enhance their emotional intelligence. It's sort of like a muscle. Keep working out on it. It can get better. And you can learn to take control of how you experience and express your emotions, and can control how empathetic you are with others. And it can be used for things like relieving stress effectively, overcoming new challenges, empathizing with others, and communicating. So what are the key components of emotional intelligence? Well, there's 4 parts: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So we'll be getting into these in the next few slides, but before we do, I wanted to point out what you might notice is that the first 2 parts look inwards. And that means you're focusing on yourself and understanding your own emotions, and then learning to manage them. While the second 2 parts are outwards facing. This is being aware of social situations and then managing and developing relationships. So let's start off first, emotional self-awareness. It's the capacity to turn into your own feelings, sense inner signals, and recognize how your feelings affect you and your performance. It's an important skill for any leadership at any level, as well as, to be honest, something for life. The purpose of developing emotional self-awareness is that it allows us to understand how our bodily sensations and our emotions impact ourselves, others, and our environments. Every single moment we are in is an opportunity for us to be self-aware. So take a moment right now to think about this. How are you feeling at this very moment? Are you feeling refreshed after the weekend and ready to tackle the week productively? Or are you distracted or anxious because you're thinking about a test or an assignment you have to do, or work or something like that? Being mindful and actively thinking about your current state and why you think you might be feeling a certain way is the first step towards emotional awareness. Let's take a moment now to think about this scientifically, because if we can understand why certain things make us react a certain way, it might actually help us be more self-aware. When a strong negative emotions are triggered, such as if you were faced with a conflict, the limbic system within the brain, so that's the part of the brain that deals with emotions and memory, is immediately activated. When this is activated, it can obstruct the other executive functions of the brain and puts us in a potentially volatile or reactive state. People with high emotional intelligence recognize this and have learned to neutralize their internal automatic reactions to a situation. They proceed with caution, keeping their reactions in check, whereas someone with low emotional intelligence might become extremely focused on the person or the situation that has caused the problem they face. In essence, they allow their emotions to hijack their behavior. An example of this is when you're seeing red, or like the Hulk, you kind of go really angry and really big and scary. This hijacked state of mind can easily sabotage a person's ability to get the outcome that you want. Recognizing and identifying one's own reaction in real time is a crucial first step towards emotional intelligence. And as some of you probably are thinking too, this isn't always the easiest. Sometimes you may not know you're absolutely pissed till after the fact, till the damage has been done. But there's good ways to reflect, to go, okay, what are potential triggers? If I'm feeling this way, that's an issue. Okay. So how do you manage emotional self-awareness? How do you get the Hulk from being a raging monster to that little picture I found on the screen? So first, you can practice mindfulness. Research shows that mindful meditation helps enhance your ability to be aware of your feelings and emotions when they happen, and also gives you the capability to hit the pause button between feeling an emotion and how you act. You can check in with yourself. Set out some time throughout the day to assess your emotional state. Ask yourself a series of questions and answer them honestly, because no one else is going to know. You don't want to fool yourself. Some things you can ask are, how am I feeling? What is the source? How are these feelings manifesting themselves in my body? Am I experiencing tenseness, clenching my teeth, feeling worn down, anxious, fear, anything like that? Be in the moment. Listen to what your emotions and feelings might be telling you at any given moment. You can learn to use the information you hear from within to gain added insight and guidance in working through an issue as they happen in a real situation. And finally, keep a journal of your feelings. As easily as just writing down what happened, what you're feeling, and how you reacted. Did you experience any physical reactions, such as a racing heart or sweaty palms, or was it just a feeling of agitation or frustration? If you write that down, A, you don't have to remember it, and B, you can reflect back. Okay, how was it? When did this happen? Was it during a meeting? Was it during a test? See if you can identify that. Just being aware of your emotions is a great first step, but it's generally not enough. The next step of emotional intelligence revolves around the ability to actually manage these emotions. Emotional self-management involves consciously controlling your own emotions and impulses, as well as adapting to changing circumstances. So when faced with conflict, individuals with high emotional self-management have the ability to slow down and visualize outcomes. Instead of letting reactions dictate their behavior, they can explore possible strategies to achieve the outcomes they want. Their energy is focused on slowing down and suppressing the urge of the emotional part of the brain to react, while also making conscious choices about what to do. So here's some tips to improve your emotional self-management. First, pause before responding. Give yourself time to stop and think about before immediately replying. I know I'm terrible at this. Sometimes I'll just jump quickly. I know some colleagues who they give themselves a few seconds, think about it. And then there's that pause, and then they go in and have their response. So try doing this. This would be as simple as taking a deep breath, or just allowing for a quick few seconds of a pause, so you get your feelings out of the way and out of your thoughts before responding. The second is take a step back. Sometimes you might need to leave a room, and that's okay. It's better to take a walk, drink some water, call or text a friend, whatever it may be. What is your output? Walk away from a bit and then come back. And finally, recognize your emotions. Again, as mentioned before, writing always helps. Try jotting down what you're feeling and what caused the distress. You're likely to start identifying patterns. Just like data collection, the more data you get, the more analyses you can draw from there. And if you know what triggers you, the next time a similar situation occurs, you'll be better positioned to handle it in a healthy and positive way. The next is social awareness. This is the ability to sense, understand, and react to others' emotions while comprehending social networks. What this does is it enables you to recognize and interpret the mainly nonverbal cues others are constantly using to communicate with you. These cues let you know how others are really feeling, how their emotional state is changing from moment to moment, and what's truly important to them. In a nutshell, social awareness is an expansion of emotional self-awareness, in that you're trying to understand the emotions of others, accomplished mainly through empathy. When you're faced with a conflict, people with low social awareness may make false assumptions in the heat of the moment. They often assume that there is a negative intent behind the behavior of others, sometimes as a form of projection from their own emotions. In general, when their emotions are triggered, these people assume the worst, and their assumption fuels the fire of their reactive behavior. However, people with high emotional intelligence, on the other hand, tune into others through the use of empathy, and they look for positive intentions behind what may appear to be negative behavior. So instead of reacting negatively to bad behavior, these people seek to respond to another person's positive intentions and lead them towards behaviors that better express their intentions. So how do you build social awareness? Well, first, it's improve your listening skills. Give others your full and undivided attention. When you're in a meeting or in a call, don't look at your phone, don't look at others around the room. Listen to the individual talking and give them your full attention. A trick that I was taught years ago was that if you're talking to someone, it's always good to make eye contact. Like when they're talking to you, look at their eyes. So it's like, okay, let them know that they have your full attention. And pay attention to your interactions with other people, what they say, how they say, and what they do. Try to also identify other people's emotions and pay attention to facial expressions and body language. For example, if you're in a meeting, someone's like, oh yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, they're saying they agree, but if they're going like this, then maybe they don't. And that's a cue. So how people react, and they may not even know, but their body language may be saying something totally different to what they're actually verbally communicating to you. The next is relationship management. This is the fourth key component in developing high emotional intelligence. This is the ability to inspire, influence, and develop others, all while managing conflict. With successful relationship management, individuals can own their emotions and the emotions of others to manage interactions successfully. Be an active, don't judge speaker's speech. Yes, but if you have questions to speaker's speech, ask them, not a bad thing. When faced with conflict, people with low relationship management, they might act in the heat of the moment with destructive behavior that can actually undermine their future relationship with another person. On the other hand, people with high relationship management remain cognizant that how they interact in the present moment determines the quality of their relationship in the future. So by keeping this broad perspective during a conflict, these people can focus on their self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness, and resist the impulse to react negatively to another person and possibly sabotage that relationship. Here's some tips to improve relationship management. You can enhance your natural communication style. Think about your interactions with others and how you typically communicate in both relaxed and stressful encounters. In relaxed ones, are you talking more casually, more calmly, whereas in stress encounters, maybe you're more forceful, maybe you're more aggressive, maybe you're talking quicker. And be honest with yourself and identify a few positives and a few negative communication traits that you possess. And learn to take feedback well. Hopefully, most folks here do take feedback well, hence why you're in an entrepreneurial program. But at times, receiving feedback can be difficult. This can be the perfect opportunity to learn and improve, and use your self-management to respond positively to the feedback. And this one for founders especially can be tricky sometimes because you put in hundreds of hours on your idea doing development, customer research. If you get feedback that isn't positive based on that, you might automatically have a hard time taking that in because you invested so much. So you've got to be able to learn to take that feedback, and even if it's not great, even people are poking holes in it, understand what's the learning opportunities from such feedback. And don't avoid interactions. Sometimes there may be people who just get under your skin. There may be times where we can't avoid these people, especially in a professional environment, or maybe you're stuck in a group project with them. Don't avoid these people or situations that may require you to interact. Instead, face these situations head on using your own self-awareness, your self-management, and social awareness strategies. Yes, at first it might be uncomfortable, but over time it becomes easier. And just like as I mentioned before, as you're growing that muscle, as you're building, over time, as you experience more, you know how to deal with these type of people or people similar in this scope. So now that we've gone over conflict resolution as well as emotional intelligence, let's discuss how these two can come together. A leader skilled at conflict management has the ability to help others through emotional or tense situations by bringing disagreements into the open and defining solutions that everyone can endorse. These are leaders who take the time to understand different perspectives and who can work towards finding a common ground that everyone can agree on. They acknowledge the view of all sides while redirecting the energy towards a shared idea or an agreeable solution. In other words, you're able to listen to everyone, understand where they're coming from, why they're coming from, more importantly, and then taking all that and putting that towards somewhere where, okay, there's a lot of different opinions, but we're all on the same page in these aspects, these shared ideas. Let's work together on that and create that solution. And in order to help others through emotional or tense situations, a leader first must be able to recognize and manage their own emotions. It goes to the old saying, if you can't help yourself, how can you help others? And as we discussed, this takes emotional self-awareness and emotional self-control. Taking the time to understand the different perspectives requires empathy and adaptability to recognize the different viewpoints and to be able to adjust your own outlook and to consider alternatives. And as I've said numerous times, this isn't something that you'll be able to do overnight. This doesn't happen by just applying a framework and, after one or two conflicts, you're a veteran, you can do this. You're going to have some trial and error. But at the same time, if you're able to emphasize and adapt and also reflect on yourself, it's going to make you a much stronger leader and hopefully a much stronger individual. So just to summarize everything that we've talked about in this session, to use emotional intelligence and conflict resolution, make calm statements of fact, ask questions, and listen. Try to understand the other person's point of view without any kind of judgment. Even if your initial thought is this is wrong, try and see how where they might be coming from. Tell the facts as you see them and how they affect you. Be clear, be honest about it. Explain the outcome that you're hoping for and ask for other ideas for a solution. This will lead to a discussion that can potentially resolve the conflict that recognizes and also meets everyone's needs, and everyone will be happy about it. So that's my quick talk on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. As I mentioned before, there are generally some activities I run during this session, but just due to time, there isn't enough. So I've got two assessments here. One is a self-assessment on emotional intelligence. When I share these slides, I highly recommend everyone to take this. This is a good starting point just to see, where you are and figure out your current levels of emotional intelligence. Again, this is something that you'll develop over time. So even if your results aren't where you want them to be, that's cool. The good news is you can work on it. And please do try to be truthful on these self-assessment activities, just because, if you're lying, you're really only lying to yourself. The second is self-assessment of conflict management style. This will give you an idea of sort of what your style is for conflict management. There's 15 statements that correspond to 5 conflict management styles. A little bit of math at the end, but you should be able to figure out where do you sit on conflict management. Now, the last one isn't so much an individual activity. This is more of a role-playing activity. For any of you that have a group right now or have a group of friends that you want to try this with, feel free. Essentially, this is applying the conflict resolution roadmap to try and resolve a role-playing conflict. Essentially, it's for groups of 3 to 4 people, and you have 2 people that are role-playing and 2 people that are observers. And the role-playing individuals, you're going to try and use what you have to resolve the conflict that's in the case. So pretty straightforward. These slides will be shared to everyone with the links and all of that. But that is it for my quick lunch and learn on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Happy to take any questions. If not, we also have another session coming up this Thursday. We've got Bob Weiss. Bob is a IBZ mentor. I've worked with him for numerous years now. He has a lot of experience in communication and sales, and he's going to be talking about professionalism. Specifically, how do you work in a professional environment? How do you network? How do you communicate with others? What are some best practices? So if you folks are available at noon on Thursday, I really recommend you come out for that. Bob is fantastic, and you can get a lot of good insight from his sessions. If there isn't anything else, I'll be sticking around if there are any other questions. If not, have yourselves a great Monday, and hope to see everyone on Thursday.
Thank you, Jeff. I have a question. I thought that